On a recent episode, I deviated from some of the normal content that I talk about on the podcast to tell you about my computer. That old laptop of mine was from 2017, and it's the one that I was using to record that episode. If you've already heard it or go back and listen to that episode, I talk about that computer as if I want to stretch it out until the M3 MacBook Pro lineup comes out sometime in 2024. And for the main topic of that episode, I dove into the most frugal way to buy a MacBook Pro. I compared buying brand new on release week versus buying a new machine as soon as it comes out on the refurb store to buying the model from 1 or 2 years ago off of the refurbished store. And in that episode, I was genuinely surprised to find out which way was the cheapest to own a MacBook Pro. Shortly after that episode got edited, on Thursday, a macOS update got pushed to my machine and I noticed it. I didn't update during the work week. I've sort of avoided doing that in case the update becomes problematic. Something that I really haven't personally experienced, but heard can happen sometimes. So I waited until Saturday, I backed up my computer, and I went to update the operating system. What ended up happening when I tried to update is it rebooted again, and I got an Apple logo with a progress bar, and it stopped for hours, for 5 to 6 hours. I ended up calling Apple later that Saturday, and they walked me through a few steps, some of which I tried, some of which I tried again. One of which was to boot into Safe Boot, and the weirdest thing happened. I tried to reboot from Safe Boot after successfully getting into a GUI interface, and it would not let me reboot because installer was running on a third-party software that was already on the machine. And unless I quit the installer, it wouldn't let me reboot at all. And rebooting only brought me back to another progress bar that was going to be frozen. So Apple's advice was to leave it in Safe Boot for a long time, just leave it alone, reboot it, and leave it overnight. That ended up working. I was able to get into the latest version of Ventura and run the machine almost like normal. I say almost because the machine was laggy, it was buggy, and it was crashing throughout that week. It was genuinely frustrating using the computer. It even had a kernel panic crash. The following Friday rolls around and Apple has pushed out another update for Ventura, and I'm relieved to see it because I think that they realized that they pushed out a buggy update. And they know from the reports that were sent in from my machine and others that it was causing problems. So this was going to fix it. That was my hope. I did the exact same thing I did last week. I waited till Saturday. In the morning, I backed up my computer and I gave it a good update. And it froze again. I ended up calling Apple twice that weekend, and they scheduled a Genius Bar appointment for me that following Monday at an Apple store that was 30 minutes away from my home. I tried everything, even booting into Safe Boot resulted in crashing and restarting of the computer. Nothing seemed to help it. And I was starting to feel worried that I had a paperweight on my hands, that the machine that I spent so much money on just so I could have something faster than my dad, about 6-7 years ago, was now worthless. I'm sure you would feel the same if your computer, if you put any good money into it, became bricked in a matter of moments. Having nothing left to lose, I decided I was going to erase all of the data off the computer. I had it backed up, should be fine. I know my backup hard drive is old, but it passed first aid, and it was my only hope. I probably wasn't going to be able to get any data off the computer anymore at this point anyway. If there was a third-party software or some sort of data problem in the storage, I could probably parse it out by wiping the whole machine and installing the OS fresh. And without delay, and with a little bit of emotional hesitation, I wiped all the data off of my personal and work machine. It was a blank slate, and it wanted to have the OS installed on it from 2017 when it was brand new. The problem was, on the recovery mode for the Apple laptop, it only lets you install an OS that's hosted on Apple servers and is live. And the old OS that it ran was no longer hosted on Apple servers, so it could not find an operating system to start working again. I was a step further back than I was to begin with now. I had a computer that didn't have a functioning operating system. Fortunately, I got to the Apple Store on Monday after working with a redundant PC tower to get into work. I got to Apple, And they had a version of an OS that they could put on hosted locally. It wasn't the oldest one, it was the version after. I think it was Catalina. And to my surprise, they managed to get the operating system, the old one, on the laptop. That was refreshing, and it gave me a little bit of hope. It took a long time. The store was actually getting ready to close. And the tech who helped me said, hey, we're going to now update to Ventura, and once the computer's done updating, you should be good to go. In this process, the computer had passed all the hardware tests, so potentially the hardware wasn't failing, and I was going to have my computer back. But lo and behold, the update to Ventura failed, and it failed again, and it failed again. The Apple staff started trying different ways to download the operating system through different avenues, and all of them were failing. It was as if the hardware on the laptop, under the stress of trying to update the operating system, was simply crashing to a halt and not allowing the machine to do anything moving forward. Even trying to install older versions of macOS, not Ventura, going to Big Sur, didn't work. The machine just no longer could update from one operating system to the next. The store manager at this point, at past closing, told me that my laptop likely had hardware failing on it. However, there was a silver lining. It had passed the hardware test, which means I qualified for full trade-in value, $405 for that old machine, for a paperweight that I couldn't sell on eBay because it couldn't update the operating system. And it was declared vintage by Apple, so they weren't going to support any hardware repair. I was thrilled to hear that $405 was an option, and there was a little tip that came out of this for me. Chris told me that if I traded in the machine for the value and put it toward a new purchase, that they would be able to deduct the trade-in value from the new purchase price, and it would save me on taxes. The equivalent for my old machine then went from $405 to almost $450 given the tax savings. And that was a pretty sweet benefit. Before I tell you what I did that evening after visiting the Apple Store, it's time to cover today's budget tip.